The Civil War in America was a time of much suffering and bloodshed. The North and South had fought a brutal war over issues that would remain unsettled well into the 29th century. Once the fighting was over, Americans found that they were fairly bored with the lack of overt brotherly violence. This left America as a country full of violent idiots with no healthy outlet for their urges. While many were contented with baseball or boxing, still others saw these pastimes as being too full of mathematics and rules. It was then that wrestling emerged as a form of entertainment that could readily be found at carnivals and other traveling acts. Most of the competitors were college wrestlers looking to make a quick buck, and the fights were legitimate. Eventually, pro wrestling grew into a popular social event capable of filling stadiums. And by the turn of the century, it was easily as popular as boxing and baseball. During this boom era, quietly amongst themselves, the wrestlers began to make informal agreements as to the outcome of matches. This allowed wrestlers to avoid injury, increase appearances, and, therefore, maximize their earning potential. Frank Gotch and Martin Burns emerged as the main draws of the day. Soon, however, boxing promoters, whose sport had not yet been exposed as fake, became jealous of the box office success of wrestling, and slyly exposed that it was on the fix. This, combined with the ill-timed retirement of Gotch, would lead to a decline in fan support and popularity. Business continued to struggle until the 1920s, when three men, who would come to be known as the Gold Dust Trio, emerged to shape the future of wrestling. Ed Lewis, Billy Sando, and Toots Monk figured that since wrestling was a work, why not make it more dramatic and interesting? They revolutionized the business by introducing time limits, disqualifications, signature holds, cheating tactics, referee tomfoolery, and tag team wrestling, amongst other innovations. The Gold Dust Trio's most innovative accomplishment, however, was likely the start of promotions. Unlike in the past, when wrestling cards were comprised of talent hired from all over, the trio hired a permanent stable of wrestlers for extended periods of time. By retaining the same group of wrestlers, fans could become familiar with their product. This helped the trio to build a new fan base. Wherever their promotion went, advertising their familiar wrestlers in advance. Another key benefit of retaining the same wrestlers was the ability to run angles and storylines. Without their wrestlers going elsewhere to wrestle, the trio were able to extend feuds over long periods of time. Their formula would ensure their dominance of the wrestling world for a decade. Soon, local promotions were popping up all over the country, and the newfound competition would begin to take its toll on the trio. And by the late 1920s, their supremacy would finally come to an end. However, their biggest downfall wouldn't be from competition. Rather, their demise came in the form of a man named Stanislaus Zbyszko. What was planned as a standard dropping of the world title went terribly wrong. Zbyszko was scheduled to drop the belt to a new talent, named Wayne Munn. However, Zbyszko would ignore the instructions of the booker. He instead decided to shoot on and defeat Munn, retaining the title. To exacerbate matters, Zbyszko, out of spite, immediately dropped the title to their biggest competition, Joe Stecher. Stecher would complicate things further by constantly ducking Ed Lewis and his attempts to take his belt back in a shoot fight. This fiasco would cause a considerable amount of damage. By the time they did get the belt back, it was deemed nearly meaningless. This would ultimately cause the demise of the Gold Dust Trio's dominance over the wrestling business. Their brand of slam-bang Western-style wrestling would leave an indelible mark on the industry, however, and set the stage for a modern era of professional wrestling. The 1930s and 40s would see drastic shifts in the landscape of the wrestling world. The driving force of these changes was the fact that the sport was now seen as big business. Rival promotions would raid nearby talent, and each create their own world champion. This cutthroat method of business would persist until the formation of the National Wrestling Alliance in 1948. The influence of the NWA as a central governing body, with its singular, undisputed world champion, would be absolute and undeniable. This control, combined with the expansion of the interstate highway system, and the inevitable popularity and availability of regional television, would usher in an era of wrestling that was defined by what would come to be known as the territory system. The territory system would dominate wrestling for nearly 4 decades. While the borders, authority, popularity, and obedience of individual NWA territories was in a near constant state of flux, to this day the impact and influence of these territories is still felt. Each territory had its own signature promoter and star. While it is impossible to cram these characteristics into a static, concrete map, we are damn sure going to try anyway. Originally founded by Toots Mondt himself in 1952 as the Capital Wrestling Corporation, the New York Territory, perhaps the most powerful and influential, was most famously promoted by Vince McMahon Sr. In 1963, McMahon and Mondt had a dispute with the NWA over Nature Boy Buddy Rogers being booked to hold the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. As a result, the New York Territory broke away from the NWA and rechristened themselves the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWF. Throughout the Territory era, however, New York maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship with the NWA governing body. Their primary star, Bruno Sammartino, held the WWF World Championship for a combined 11 years, and sold out Madison Square Garden 16,342 times. The Minneapolis Territory, which ran from 1960 to 1991, was owned and founded by Verne Gagne and Wally Carbo. The territory was originally part of the NWA, but became an independent territory in the late 1950s, when the NWA refused to make Verne Gagne the world champion. The territory would come to be known as the American Wrestling Association. The top stars of AWA were Verne Gagne, Nick Bockwinkel, Verne Gagne, Hulk Hogan for a moment, and Verne Gagne. The AWA is best known for having the best wrestlers, but the most unwatchable video product of perhaps any territory. The Charlotte Territory, also known as Jim Crockett Promotions or Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, was founded in 1931 and promoted by the Crockett family. Charlotte created many stars, chiefly among them the Nature Boy Ric Flair. The Crockett family sold a majority interest in the promotion to Turner Broadcasting System in 1988, resulting in the creation of World Championship Wrestling. Fortunately, the elder Crockett would not live to see the legacy of this, the greatest of the territories, be raped and bastardized by an endless succession of corporate jackasses and two-bit writers. The St. Louis Territory, or St. Louis Wrestling Club, was one of the smallest, yet most influential, of all the territories. It was owned and operated by Sam Muchnick, who ran the NWA during the entire time that the NWA actually worked. Think of the St. Louis Territory as the pro wrestling guerrilla of the NWA. All of the big stars of the other territories wrestled here, but none of it was particularly thought of mattering elsewhere. Bruiser Brody is pictured here, because Sam Muchnick was the only promoter that he did not legitimately want to kill. The Amarillo Territory, known as Western States Sports, was founded by Dory Detton in 1946. However, the promotion enjoyed its greatest success in the 1960s and 1970s under the management of Dory Funk and, later, his sons, Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk, who were both NWA champions. Honestly, if you are 10 minutes into this video and don't know Dory and Derry, then funk you. The San Antonio Territory, or Southwest Championship Wrestling, was owned and promoted by Joe Blanchard and ran from 1978 to 1985. It was mostly the bitch of other territories, such as the AWA, until it was purchased by Texas All-Star Wrestling and absorbed into that company. Its top star was Tully Blanchard, I guess. The Portland Territory, or Pacific Northwest Wrestling, was actually a really underrated territory. Portland ran from 1925 all the way until 1991. The promotion was promoted by Don Owen from the middle of World War II until the start of Operation Desert Storm. While many stars passed through Portland, its most popular product was probably Rowdy Roddy Piper. The San Francisco Territory was promoted by Joe Malswich from 1949 to 1961. However, nobody really cared. When Roy Shire started local rival promotion Big Time Wrestling in 1961, and built his promotion around the flamboyant aerial performer Ray Stevens, people cared a little bit more. Malswich died a year after being put out of business, and Big Time Wrestling ran for 20 more years. The Buffalo Cleveland Territory, or National Wrestling Federation, was owned by promoter Pedro Martinez and ran from 1970 to 1974. The promotion was then revived in 1986 by Robert Ruskin, who used out-of-work wrestlers from WWF and the like until closing operations in 1994. The most popular star from the original NWF was probably Johnny Powers. The Los Angeles Territory, or NWA Hollywood Wrestling, ran from 1958 until 1982. The territory was most successful under the promotion of Michael Bell, with their most popular overall superstar having been Classy Freddie Blassie. Even though this video is strictly about wrestling in the United States, the Calgary Territory technically stuck down into Montana for a period. However, I do not feel like talking about the Hart family. It is frankly redundant at this point. The Kansas City Territory, or Heart of America Sports Attractions, or the Midwest Wrestling Association, or Central States Wrestling, or the World Wrestling Alliance, ran from 1948 until 1987, and was mostly shitty. Bob Gay Idol did the best job of promoting it. And also, Harley Race's a badass. The Phoenix Territory, promoted by Barry Burnson, absolutely did not matter, and hardly anyone of note wrestled there. Tito Montes was okay though. The Dallas Territory, also known as the World Class Championship Wrestling, ran from 1966 until 1990. It was promoted by Fritz von Erich, and the primary stars were his sons, most of whom died tragically. WCCW experienced tremendous success from 1981 through 1985, shattering attendance records and achieving global exposure through their syndicated television program. Unfortunately, the success of the Freebirds in this territory led to decades of sound bites from Michael P.S. Hayes. The Tulsa, New Orleans Territory, known by most as Mid-South Wrestling, was founded as NWA Tri-State by Leroy McGurk in the 1950s. However, it is most popularly known as the territory that Bill Watts booked the hell out of. Many stars and storylines that found popularity elsewhere started here. Additionally, much of the eventual mid-card of the eventual WWF found amazing success here, such as the Junkyard Dog. Memphis is complicated. The territory was founded in the 40s and split in the 1970s. The guy on the left, Nick Gulas, tried to put his own son on top. Jerry Jarrett split away from NWA Mid-America to found the Continental Wrestling Association, built around Jerry the King Lawler. Gulas folded, and the legacy of the Lawler-Jarrett combination speaks for itself. The Detroit Territory was originally founded by Harry Light in 1945. The original Sheik purchased the territory in the 1960s, placed himself at the top of the card, and proceeded to run the territory into the ground for 2 decades. The Indianapolis Territory, also known as the World Wrestling Association, was operated by Dick the Bruiser and his business partner Wilbur Snyder. The promotion, which had a close working relationship with the AWA, ran from 1964 until 1989. The Atlanta Territory, also known as Georgia Championship Wrestling, ran from 1944 until 1984. Known for an incredibly strong television product, the promotion was most famously run by Jim Barnett, and is commonly associated with the Briscoe brothers and the Andersons. The Knoxville Territory, also known as Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling and Continental Championship Wrestling, was most famously run by Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. The territory ran from 1954 until 1990. Their most well-known star in later years was the criminally underrated Eddie Gilbert. Tampa. Dusty fucking Rhodes. Thank you for watching this short history of wrestling territories in the United States. If you have made it this far, it is very likely that you may now proceed to the comments section to provide corrections, because you are a gigantic dork. Before you waste too much energy, please keep in mind that while you may be right, you are not the one who took the time to make this video. Please, be my guest. Make